Okay, this is the live internet studies segment one, entitled, what is the title? Off the top of my head, I'm drawing a blank. Eschatology, a biblical study of end time events. My name is Ari Ben Lyman Hanavi. Let's jump back into the study. Looking at the screen right now, you can see we have worked our way past topics 1, 2, and 3. So we're finally past the key scriptural passages. It took a little bit longer, and I hope that you appreciate the effort of laying a foundation for a study like this. This is essentially a study on the book of Revelation, but I felt it's necessary to go back and look through certain Old Testament and New Testament passages to give us the background information necessary to appreciate what we're going to be encountering when we get to the book of Revelation. Continuing along that lines, but not moving as slowly per se as we did through the scriptural passages, we're ready now for topic 4 tonight. Book of Daniel, Prophecies Near and Far. And if I time it right tonight for this first hour-long segment, we will work our way through Daniel chapters 2 and 7 tonight. It'll feel like verse by verse, even though we're not going to do every verse. Some of it will be overview. So I'm just telling you in advance, if I can hit it in one session, the 1 hour session, that's fine. I'm not trying to rush anything, but it just might work out that way. Otherwise, 2 and 7, and then eventually we'll turn to chapter 9 and some of the other chapters 10, 11, 12 as they're brought into chapter 9, but those will be treated as a unit. So 2 and 7 are one unit of Daniel, and then 9, 10, 11, and 12 of Daniel are, in my study, are treated kind of as one unit, and that'll certainly take a little bit longer. And again, this is not a study on the book of Daniel, but we are going to need to anchor some of the resources that we're going to encounter in the book of Revelation. We're going to need to anchor them in the book of Daniel because that's what John himself does. All right, so that's where the schedule looks. Again, this schedule is open to change, but so far it's pretty up to date. Let's look briefly, before I jump into Daniel, the hermeneutic principle that we studied a few weeks back, almost a month ago, where we talked about the different ways to interpret Revelation. You remember those 4 views? I'll flash a little graphic on the screen that shows the different views. But I have to revisit a little bit of that because it also pertains to the book of Daniel. And so I want you to know the approach that I'm taking as I'm studying this topic of eschatology and where my preferences are driving me, what type of study I'm aiming to accomplish. You may have personal differences with my own interpretive method of study. That's fine. As long as we can both agree on some of the majors and the major points. That's what I hope to accomplish. I don't have all the answers and I don't know all the details. That's the whole point. Eschatology is a tricky subject because a lot of it is still future, or a lot of it is still unknown, we'll put it that way. Unless you're a full-blown preterist, then you just believe you figured everything out because everything's history. Maybe that's a better perspective for you. But just real quick, I'm only going to take like 5 minutes on this. I've got a web resource pulled up that brings in the 4 kind of main eschatological end-time perspectives when we're dealing with end-time prophecy, like the book of Revelation or something like that. Now, a lot of the book of Daniel is history, but that doesn't stop us from using this type of viewpoint to realize that it's helpful when it comes to looking at topics like the book of Daniel. So there are 4 views. There's the historicist view. There's the idealist view, number 2. There's the preterist view, and then there's the futurist view. So let me just read some of this information for you real quick. I don't have to read all of it, and this is in no particular order, but the historicist view, this approach to Revelation, and again, fill in the word Revelation there, which is simply end-time prophecy. So this applies to Daniel also. This approach to end-time prophecy holds that the book supplies a prophetic panorama of church history from the 1st century to the second coming of Christ. So again, if you're of that perspective when you're viewing end-time prophecy, you're not really going to be looking at so much everything to be smashed into an end-time, end of days scenario. You're going to look at all of church history, and you're going to see everything kind of played out for the last 2,000 years per se of church history. That's your perspective. And again, I'm not saying which ones are right or wrong. I think each one has its pros and cons. Each one has its application. It's the whole application of idiom of right tool for the right job. So The idealist view is defined as the view that holds that the book of Revelation or other books like it, such as apocalyptic genre like Daniel, is primarily a symbolic description of the ongoing battle between God and the devil, between good and evil. So again, the idealist view is a view that doesn't really try to say prophecy is foretelling some future event per se, so much as it's instead giving us a kind of a lesson that's timeless that we can carry it on and utilize at any given age that we're in. So it doesn't matter what age we live in as believers or people of God, whether you're Jewish or not Jewish, depending on which background you come from. The idealist view simply says, what are the lessons we can glean from this particular book? It doesn't have to all be literal. It doesn't have to all be futural. It doesn't have to be pertaining to something that's really going to happen. Rather, it's almost anecdotal. It's almost like a fairy tale. And that's why there are a lot of magical creatures that are described like dragons and beasts and things like that. It's almost as if the idealist is saying God didn't really want us to believe any of this is really going to happen per se, but rather it's trying to portray this symbolic struggle that's cosmic, light versus dark, the good versus bad. So that's one perspective again. Moving along, number 3, the preterist view. Remember the word preterist is related to this word. Let me see if my definition will pop up. There we go. Okay, I don't really need that. Preterist is the idea that everything happened in the past. And so the preterist view, this approach holds that the prophecies of Revelation, and again, this includes the book of Daniel, were fulfilled in AD 70 when Titus and his Roman army overran Jerusalem and destroyed the Jewish temple. And again, this kind of set the stage for the bringing all the prophecies to a conclusion. And so that everything else that happens afterwards is essentially living in the reality of God has already made good on his promises, and now we need to just live our lives according to something that has already come and gone. Now again, notice, even at this website level, it simply calls it the preterist view. But in reality, if we were to dig a little deeper, we will find that there's two types of preterism. There's a full preterism, which takes more of the prophecies, if not all of the prophecies, maybe even hyper preterism, we could call it that, takes all of the prophecies of the book of Revelation, which is widely viewed by every Christian as the final book in the Bible, so that would mean that's the end of the story. Takes all of those prophecies and says this has already happened, and we've been living 1900, 2000 years since the fulfillment of all those details. So there's no literal Antichrist that's going to hit the scene anymore. There's no literal day of the Lord where all these judgments are going to be poured out. There's no literal great tribulation or destruction of Jerusalem anymore. All of that took place, and so Revelation was written in this model. The book of Revelation wasn't written in the 90s like most conservative Bible teachers teach. The book of Revelation was instead came at a very early date, like in the 60s. It has to be before 70, and that really is the defining factor of the full preterist view. If the book of Revelation is a later book, like the 90s, then it's a fatal flaw in the logic of preterism, full preterism. You understand what I'm saying there? Right? Because this means that John wrote after the destruction of the temple, which means his prophecy couldn't have been fulfilled in 70 AD. So it's just like basic common sense there. But there's another version of preterism known as partial preterism, which takes part of the prophecies in books like Daniel and Revelation to be fulfilled in 70 AD, and then it pushes the other ones into the future at a distant date. So we'll talk about which one of those views maybe is a little bit more beneficial for our study. And then lastly on this list is the futurist view, and it's defined as the futurist approach to interpreting the book of Revelation holds that most of the events described in the book will take place in the end times just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. And so this view, it goes on to say, honors the book's claims to be prophecy. It also recognizes that just as the Old Testament prophecies of the first coming of Christ were fulfilled literally, more than 100 of them, so the prophecies of the second coming and the events that will lead up to it will be fulfilled literally. So in case you haven't guessed, I am of the futurist perspective primarily. when I'm reading through Daniel, when I'm reading through Revelation, I'm primarily reading stuff that I believe is going to take place in the future. But I'm drawing from some of the other perspectives. Like, I agree with preterists that partial fulfillment of prophecies that we find as early as the book of Daniel that we're going to see took place in the first century, or even earlier than the first century, even prior, a few centuries earlier. For instance, there are numerous details in the book of Daniel that we'll find out in time that deal with the history of Medes and the Persians overtaking Babylon, Greece overtaking Medo-Persia, and Alexander the Great's conquests, his 4 generals picking up his kingdom after he died, and Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus IV, stepping onto the scene and doing bad things to God's people, etc., etc. All of that is history now past, meaning up to the times of the Maccabees, a few centuries prior to Christ. And yet, when we read through the book of Daniel, when we read through the book of Revelation, we find that there are details that could match what happened in 70 AD, even though the book was written later. In other words, perhaps there was some backward-looking event language and forward-looking event at the same time. And owing to the fact that prophecy has this, and I'll put this little graphic on the screen as you remember, near and far telescoping effects, where you will have a prophecy that is written for the near-term fulfillment of the prophet that's writing it, near to him, and so it's kind of right around the corner event. It's history to us now, but it was near to him. But yet at the same time, there's a far aspect that based on the details of language, if we take it literally, cannot have happened yet. So to the idea that there are near/far or now/not yet aspects of prophecy, some parts of preterism seem to be true, at least the partial preterist perspective. I really don't find a lot of association or usefulness with the full hyper-preterist perspective that everything has been fulfilled. I'm going to have to reject that. And I think most prophecy buffs also probably lean in that direction, although preterism as a system is gaining popularity once again here in our modern age. But at the same time, I also again recognize that parts of prophecy are designed to help us remember that this is one big giant history book marching forward in God's perspective. He wants us to understand that prophecy really is a description of history, past, present, and future. History is what we described as man's dealings on planet Earth. You're always living in the present, but you're reminiscing about things that took place in the past and drawing lessons from them and growing. But you also have a view towards the future of what's around the corner, even though it's unknown to us. But from God's perspective, he sees all of history, past, present, and future, all at the same time, because he lives outside of space and time. So when he gives us prophetic details in the books like Daniel and Revelation, it's to our benefit to understand that this is real human history, whether it be past, present, or future, but it's still real, meaning it's not make-believe, it's not science fiction, it's not fairy tale. It's real human history that he's trying to get us to understand and identify with. So kind of mash up the historicist view and the idealist view in that sense. But in the end, if you don't realize that prophecy is just a foretelling of an event that should happen at least once, if not maybe twice, but at least once, then I think you're losing sight of the way prophecy is designed to work. So having said that, let me kind of give you an overview of where we're going to be looking at in these chapters. Again, Daniel chapters 2, 7, and then 9 through 12, as you can see on this graphic on my screen. There's this giant statue that Nebuchadnezzar sees in Daniel chapter 2 that we're going to start reading about tonight. And that's the statue that you see on your screen right now. We'll come back to this image over and over again, but just kind of telling you, whetting your appetite and letting you know kind of in advance that this particular statue is God's way of telling this king, as well as Daniel, certain events that are going to happen in the future that pertain not just to Daniel's people, but also pertain to the Gentile nations that are involved in God's moving of events. And the purpose, of course, is to let everyone know that God is the one who's in control of history. God's not just the one who's in control of his Bible and prophecy, and he hopes that history will somehow line up. That's not the way God wrote his word. Rather, God is telling us in advance of historical events that are sure to happen, even if all the details aren't given to us. In other words, even if there's a lot of symbolism and stuff like that. But we're going to get to that. So that's what we're looking at. This statue that we're looking at is also going to be, a lot of the details are going to be filled in by the reading that we're going to be looking at. And so you can see another resource on my screen right now that's going to I'll return to this, but I'm showing it to you in advance in case you get lost. I'm kind of prepping it for you kind of in outline form, overview form, that we're going to be looking at a large statue that has six kingdoms that are portrayed, five earthly kingdoms and then one heavenly kingdom that are portrayed in the statue. So just be aware of that. That's what we're going to be looking at. At this point in time, I'm also going to make a recommendation that I haven't done yet, but I'll go ahead and do it at this point in time. There's a book that has highly influenced my own prophetic studies, and it's known as The Sign, put together by a Christian man by the name of Robert Van Kampen, who recently passed away within the last, I think, 5 to 10 years. But his resources are so thorough that I can recommend this resource to others who are prophecy buffs, prophecy students. I don't agree with everything that Mr. Van Kampen puts forth in his book. For instance, he takes the classic dispensational approach, which I have some issues with dispensationalism as it deals with Israel's history. But helpful to us as prophecy students is that he takes the literal futurist approach, which means he believes that prophecy is going to be fulfilled literally, therefore a lot of it is still future. In other words, he's not a preterist or a historicist or an idealist, and he's not an eclectic view either. But since he's a futurist, and that's the model that I work with and that I understand by the Bible to be written from, then the book speaks the language that I'm looking for. Plus, he spent, I can't remember how many thousands of hours poring through every single Old Testament prophecy that seemed to be relevant on the topic. And so he's extremely thorough, very well written, but not overly technical. It's a very, it's a comprehensive book, but it's like 500 something pages. But at the same time, it's not overly like seminarian. It's not like an encyclopedic. Not like a technical journal or something like that with all these heavy Greek and Hebrew terms and stuff. He's very down to earth in his approach. So it's a good book. He has some odd conclusions to some of the details. Like he thinks that maybe Hitler might be a resurrected Hitler might be a candidate for the Antichrist. He believes that maybe the Nazi Germany was maybe the seventh beast empire of the Book of Revelation. Some of those views, again, he believes that maybe Papal Rome might also be probably an intense part when it comes to Mystery Babylon. I think he believes that Papal Rome probably is Mystery Babylon or something like that. So these are views that have been challenged over time, but he's a pre-wrather like me, and that's what the book is kind of anchored in, is the idea that God's going to save us from wrath, but he's going to cause us to go through tribulation. So pick up the book if you can. I'm flashing the Amazon page on the screen for you in case you're interested. It's $40 purchase, brand new paperback on Amazon. I don't get any kickbacks for this advertisement, so don't even worry about all that. I'm not going to put any links in the description by video or anything like that. I'm just telling you what type of book. I've got it sitting on my bookshelf right now. And if I scroll down, there's also books that people have purchased that are similar. And one of them is The Pre-Wrath Rapture by Marvin Rosenthal. And I happen to own that one as well. That's the kind of the book that started the whole pre-wrath discussion in Christianity. So just thought I'd let you know.